The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late January, and I knew before opening it that my day was about to get significantly worse. I was right. The Evergreen Valley Homeowners Association was fining me $1,500 for failing to salt my front steps during the recent snowstorm that had dumped 8 inches on our neighborhood in Denver, Colorado. According to the letter, signed by HOA President Patricia Danbury, I had violated Section 12.4 of the Community Guidelines, which mandated that all homeowners maintain safe walking conditions on their property during winter months. I read the letter 3 times, standing in my kitchen with my coffee growing cold. The thing was, I had salted my steps, every single one of them. The morning after the snowstorm, I had been out there at 6 in the morning, bag of rock salt in hand, making sure everything was clear and safe. I had even taken photos on my phone, something I had started doing after dealing with Patricia and her crew for the past 2 years. My name is Nathan Zimmerman, and I have lived in Evergreen Valley for 3 years. When I first bought my house on Maple Drive, the neighborhood seemed perfect. Tree-lined streets, well-maintained homes, friendly neighbors. But about 18 months ago, Patricia Danbury had run for HOA president on a platform of restoring community standards. And ever since then, life in Evergreen Valley had become a constant stream of violations, fines, and complaints. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my photos from that morning. Clear images of my front steps, covered in rock salt, the crystals visible against the concrete. I had done exactly what I was supposed to do. So why was I getting this fine? I decided to call the HOA office directly. A secretary named Margaret answered, her voice professionally neutral. "Hi, this is Nathan Zimmerman on Maple Drive. I just received a violation notice about my front steps not being salted, but I did salt them. I have photos and everything. One moment, please." The hold music was classical, something by Mozart. After 2 minutes, Patricia herself came on the line. "Mr. Zimmerman, this is Patricia Danbury. I understand you are calling about your violation notice." "Yes, I am. I salted my steps the morning after the snowstorm. I have time-stamped photos on my phone. The violation is not regarding your personal front steps, Mr. Zimmerman. It is regarding the public access steps on the south side of your property. Those steps remained unsalted for 48 hours following the snowstorm, creating a hazard for community members using the walkway. I walked to my living room window and looked out at the south side of my property. There was indeed a set of stone steps there, leading from the sidewalk up to the level of my yard. But I had never considered those steps my responsibility. "Those steps," I said. "I did not even know I was supposed to maintain those. They are part of the community walkway. According to our records, those steps are on your property and therefore fall under your maintenance responsibilities. The fine stands. You have 30 days to pay or we will place a lien on your property." "Wait, hold on. Can we at least discuss this?" I genuinely did not know those steps were my responsibility. No one has ever told me that before. Ignorance of the HOA guidelines is not an excuse, Mr. Zimmerman. The rules are clearly stated in the documents you received when you purchased your home. Good day." She hung up before I could respond. I stood there holding my phone, anger building in my chest. This was ridiculous. Those steps had been there when I bought the house. They looked like part of the public walkway that ran through the neighborhood. I had seen dozens of people use them, but I had always assumed they were community property, not mine to maintain. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the HOA guidelines. The document was 147 pages long, written in dense legal language that made my eyes cross. I searched for Section 12.4. It stated that homeowners were responsible for maintaining all walking surfaces on their deeded property, including but not limited to driveways, walkways, paths, and steps. The key phrase was "on their deeded property." I needed to check my property survey. I went to my filing cabinet and pulled out the folder from my home purchase. Inside was the property survey, a detailed map showing the exact boundaries of my land. I spread it out on my dining room table and studied it carefully. The south side steps were shown on the survey, but the property line was confusing in that area. It looked like the steps might actually be just outside my property boundary, on what appeared to be a common area easement. The more I looked at it, the more convinced I became that those steps were not actually mine. I took photos of the survey with my phone and sent them to my friend Derek, who worked in real estate. He called me back 20 minutes later. "Nathan, buddy, you need to get a lawyer. This looks like the steps might not even be on your property. See this dotted line here? That is an easement. If the steps are in the easement, they are community property, not yours. So the HOA cannot fine me for not maintaining them. If they are not on your property, then no, they cannot. But you will need a real estate attorney to verify this and fight the fine. Do not just ignore it. These HOA people can make your life hell if you do not respond properly." I thanked Derek and immediately started researching real estate attorneys in Denver. I found a firm called Morrison & Associates that specialized in property disputes and HOA issues. Their website featured several testimonials from homeowners who had successfully fought HOA overreach. I called their office and explained my situation to the receptionist. "We can definitely help you with that," she said. "Attorney Rebecca Morrison can see you tomorrow at 10 in the morning if that works for you." I confirmed the appointment and spent the rest of the day gathering documentation. I printed out the violation notice, my property survey, my home purchase documents, the HOA guidelines, and my photos showing that I had salted my own front steps. I also walked outside and took detailed photos and measurements of the south side steps, documenting their location relative to my property markers. The steps themselves were made of stacked stone, weathered and old. They looked like they had been there for decades, long before my house was built. There were 5 steps total, leading up about 3 feet from the sidewalk level. On either side were metal handrails, also old and worn. Nothing about these steps screamed private property. They looked exactly like what they were, a public access point for the community walkway. That evening, I did something I probably should have done months ago. I started documenting everything related to the HOA. I created a spreadsheet listing every interaction I had had with Patricia and the board over the past year. There was the warning about my mailbox being the wrong shade of black, the fine for having my trash cans visible from the street on a non-collection day, even though it was only for 2 hours, the complaint about my lawn being a 1/4 inch too long, the violation notice for having a decorative garden flag that was not pre-approved. Looking at the list, I realized I had been dealing with this harassment for far longer than I thought. Each incident had seemed minor at the time, annoying but not worth fighting. But seeing them all together, I recognized a pattern. Patricia was targeting me. I tried to think about why. I had never done anything to antagonize her. I kept my house well maintained, I was quiet, I followed the rules as best I could. Then I remembered. About 6 months ago, during an HOA meeting, Patricia had proposed increasing the annual dues by $300 per household. I had been one of only 3 homeowners who voted against it. The increase had passed anyway, but Patricia had not forgotten who opposed her. The next morning, I drove to the offices of Morrison & Associates, located in a professional building in downtown Denver. Rebecca Morrison turned out to be a woman in her early 40s with short dark hair and an air of competent professionalism. Her office was lined with law books and file boxes. "Mr. Zimmerman, please have a seat. Tell me about your situation." I laid out all my documentation on her desk and explained everything. She listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes on a legal pad. When I finished, she picked up my property survey and studied it carefully with a magnifying glass. "This is interesting," she said after several minutes. "See this notation here?" She pointed to some tiny text along the dotted line. "This indicates that the area where your steps are located is actually a permanent public access easement. That means even though the land might technically be within your property boundaries for deed purposes, it is designated for public use and maintained by the community. So I am not responsible for salting those steps. Not only are you not responsible, but the HOA would actually be the party responsible for maintaining them. Let me do some more research, but I think we have a very strong case here. The HOA has fined you for failing to maintain property that is actually their responsibility, not yours. Can we fight this fine? Absolutely. I will need you to sign a retainer agreement, and then I will draft a formal response to the HOA. We will also request a hearing before the board so we can present this evidence directly. How does that sound? That sounds great. How much are we talking about for your services? My retainer is $2,000, which covers the initial research, documentation preparation, and the board hearing. If this escalates beyond that, we can discuss additional fees. But honestly, once I present this survey evidence to the HOA, I expect they will drop the fine immediately. They do not want the liability of being proven wrong. I signed the retainer agreement and wrote a check. It hurt spending $2,000 to fight a $1,500 fine, but this was about more than money. This was about standing up to bullying and making sure Patricia did not continue to harass me and probably other homeowners. Over the next week, Rebecca worked on my case. She called me with updates almost daily. She had contacted the county assessor's office and obtained the original plat maps for Evergreen Valley. She had also found documentation from when the development was first built in 1982, showing that the south side steps on my property were specifically constructed as public access points for the community walkway system. "Nathan, this just keeps getting better," she told me over the phone. "Not only are you not responsible for these steps, but there is actually a maintenance agreement filed with the county that explicitly states the HOA must maintain all public access points in the easement areas. They have been legally required to maintain these steps for 40 years. So they should have been the ones salting them during the snowstorm." Exactly. In fact, if someone had slipped and fallen on those steps, the HOA would be liable, not you. They are trying to shift their legal responsibility onto you through this fine. Can we prove they knew about this? I am working on that. I have requested copies of all HOA maintenance records for the past 5 years. If they have been maintaining other access points in easement areas but not yours, that could show a pattern of selective enforcement or even targeted harassment. 2 days later, Rebecca called me with more news. She had received the maintenance records, and they showed that the HOA had a contract with a snow removal service that specifically included salting all public access steps in easement areas. However, the south side steps on my property were not on the service route list. "This is negligence on the part of the HOA," Rebecca explained. "They had a responsibility to include your steps in the maintenance contract, and they failed to do so. Then they tried to cover up their failure by fining you for their own negligence." The HOA hearing was scheduled for February 15th, A Thursday evening at 7 o'clock. Rebecca advised me to dress professionally and to let her do most of the talking. We arrived at the community center where the meeting was being held. The room was set up with a long table at the front for the board members and rows of chairs facing them. About a dozen other homeowners were already seated, probably there for their own issues. Patricia Danbury sat in the center of the board table, flanked by 4 other board members I vaguely recognized from the neighborhood. She looked at me with an expression of smug satisfaction as I walked in with Rebecca. Clearly, she expected this to be a quick rubber stamp approval of her fine. The meeting started with general HOA business. Budget reports, landscaping updates, discussion of upcoming community events. Finally, after 40 minutes, Patricia called my case. Next, we have the appeal filed by Nathan Zimmerman regarding his violation for failure to maintain safe conditions on his property. Mr. Zimmerman, you have 5 minutes to present your case. Rebecca stood up. Good evening. My name is Rebecca Morrison, and I am representing Mr. Zimmerman in this matter. We are not here to merely appeal this fine. We are here to demonstrate that the HOA has violated its own legal responsibilities and has attempted to shift blame onto Mr. Zimmerman for the board's negligence. Patricia's expression changed from smug to concerned. I am sorry, who are you again? I am Mr. Zimmerman's attorney. I specialize in property law and HOA disputes. Now, if I may continue. Rebecca did not wait for permission. She pulled out a large copy of my property survey and approached the board table. This is the official survey for Mr. Zimmerman's property. As you can see here, the steps in question are located within a permanent public access easement, marked clearly on the plat map filed with Adams County. She placed another document on the table. This is the original development agreement for Evergreen Valley, filed in 1982. Section 7, subsection C clearly states that all public access points within easement areas are the maintenance responsibility of the homeowners association, not individual property owners. Patricia picked up the document and read it, her face paling. The other board members leaned in to look at it as well. Rebecca continued. Furthermore, we have obtained copies of the HOA's maintenance contracts, which show that the association has an agreement with Alpine Snow Removal Services for winter maintenance of public access areas. However, the steps on Mr. Zimmerman's property were improperly excluded from this service route. She placed a third document on the table. Finally, we have the HOA's own bylaws, which state in Article 15 that the association may not fine homeowners for failing to maintain property that is not their legal responsibility. By fining Mr. Zimmerman for not salting steps that are actually the HOA's responsibility to maintain, you have violated your own bylaws. The room was completely silent. The other homeowners were watching with keen interest. One of the board members, an older man whose nameplate read, Thomas Carter, cleared his throat. Patricia, did you review the property survey before issuing this fine? Patricia's face was now bright red. I assumed that since the steps were on his property boundaries, they were his responsibility. But did you actually check the survey? Thomas pressed. I did not think it was necessary. The steps are on his land, Rebecca interjected. Being within property boundaries and being on private property are not the same thing, Miss Danbury. The easement designation supersedes the property boundary for maintenance purposes. This is basic property law. Another board member, a woman named Sandra Phelps, spoke up. Rebecca, you said the HOA's snow removal contract should have included these steps but did not. How did that happen? That is an excellent question and one I cannot answer. Perhaps Miss Danbury can explain why the steps were excluded from the service route when all similar access points in the development were included. All eyes turned to Patricia. She shuffled papers nervously. I am not involved in the day-to-day management of service contracts. That is handled by our property management company. Then perhaps we should ask them, Rebecca said. I have already contacted Evergreen Property Management. They informed me that they prepare service routes based on a list of properties provided by the HOA board. They never received information about the steps on Mr. Zimmerman's property. Thomas Carter looked at Patricia with clear disappointment. Patricia, this is a serious oversight. We could have been liable if someone was injured on those steps. Patricia stood abruptly. I think we need to table this discussion and investigate further before making any decisions. Actually, no. Thomas turned to the other board members. I move that we immediately dismiss the fine against Mr. Zimmerman and issue him a formal apology for this error. All in favor? 3 hands went up immediately. Sandra hesitated but then raised her hand as well. Patricia was the only one who did not vote. Motion carries, Thomas said. Mr. Zimmerman, on behalf of the Evergreen Valley HOA, I apologize for this mistake. The fine is dismissed, and we will ensure that your steps are added to our snow removal service route immediately. Rebecca smiled. Thank you, Mr. Carter. However, there is the matter of Mr. Zimmerman's legal fees. He was forced to retain my services to fight an improper fine that should never have been issued. I believe compensation is appropriate. Thomas nodded. How much are we talking about? My retainer was $2,000 plus expenses. I will provide an itemized invoice. Patricia finally found her voice again. The HOA should not have to pay for his choice to hire a lawyer. He could have just explained the situation. Rebecca turned to her with a level gaze. Miss Danbury, Mr. Zimmerman did attempt to explain the situation when he called your office. You dismissed his concerns and told him the fine stood. He had no choice but to seek legal representation. Furthermore, I have documented 6 other instances over the past 18 months where Mr. Zimmerman was issued violations or warnings for minor issues that other homeowners were not cited for. This suggests a pattern of targeted enforcement. The room erupted in murmurs. Several homeowners pulled out their phones, probably to check their own violation records. Thomas held up a hand for quiet. That is a serious accusation, Miss Morrison, which I am prepared to prove with documentation if necessary. However, I would prefer to resolve this matter amicably. The HOA reimburses Mr. Zimmerman's legal fees and agrees to cease any selective enforcement practices. In return, Mr. Zimmerman will not pursue further legal action for harassment. Thomas looked at Patricia, who looked like she wanted to argue but could not figure out how. Finally, he turned back to Rebecca. I think that is fair. I move that the HOA reimburse Mr. Zimmerman $2,000 for his legal fees and apologize for any selective enforcement that may have occurred. All in favor. This time, all 4 other board members raised their hands. Patricia's hand stayed firmly on the table. Motion carries. Thank you, Miss Morrison, Mr. Zimmerman. Is there anything else? Rebecca gathered her documents. Just one more thing. I recommend the HOA conduct a comprehensive review of all easement areas in the development to ensure they are being properly maintained. It would be unfortunate if this same issue existed elsewhere and resulted in an injury. Excellent suggestion. We will do that. Thank you. Rebecca and I left the community center together. Outside in the parking lot, I finally let myself relax. That was amazing, I told her. You destroyed their entire case in 5 minutes. It was not difficult. They had no case to begin with. Patricia Danbury made a vindictive decision without doing proper due diligence, and it backfired completely. I do not think she will be HOA president much longer. Really? You think she will resign or be voted out? Did you see how the other board members looked at her? They are furious. She exposed the HOA to significant legal liability with her carelessness. Thomas Carter struck me as someone who takes his board responsibilities seriously. He will not forget this. Rebecca was right. Within a week, I received a formal letter from the HOA containing an apology and a check for $2,000. The letter was signed by Thomas Carter, not Patricia Danbury. A few days after that, I saw a notice posted in the neighborhood about a special HOA election. Patricia had resigned as president, citing personal reasons. I thought that was the end of the story. I was wrong. In late March, about 6 weeks after the hearing, I received a call from Sandra Phelps, the board member who had seemed sympathetic during the meeting. She asked if she could stop by my house to discuss something important. Curious, I agreed. Sandra arrived that evening looking nervous. She was in her late 50s with graying hair and a kind face. "Nathan, thank you for seeing me. This is awkward, but I think you need to know something." "What is going on?" After the hearing, Thomas asked me to help review our easement maintenance records, like your lawyer suggested. We found something disturbing. There are 12 properties in Evergreen Valley with public access steps in easement areas. All 12 have received violations or fines for not maintaining those steps over the past 2 years. I stared at her. All 12? Yes. Patricia has collected over $18,000 in fines from homeowners who were not legally responsible for maintaining those steps. We think she knew the steps were in easement areas but fined people anyway. That is fraud. That is what Thomas thinks too. We have called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow night to discuss what to do. We wanted to let you know because you are the one who exposed this. If you had not fought your fine, we would never have looked into this. What are you going to do? Thomas wants to contact all 12 homeowners, refund their fines with interest, and possibly report Patricia to the state attorney general. This could be criminal fraud. I sat back in my chair, processing this information. Patricia had not just made a mistake with my fine. She had been systematically defrauding homeowners for years. Sandra, why would she do this? What did she have to gain? Money, we think. The fines go into the HOA's general fund, which gave Patricia a larger budget to work with. She used that money to fund her pet projects, like the new entrance monument and the neighborhood holiday decorations. She wanted to look like an effective president who was improving the community. By stealing from homeowners. Essentially, yes. Nathan, I am so sorry. If we had been paying closer attention, we would have caught this years ago. After Sandra left, I immediately called Rebecca and told her everything. She was quiet for a long moment. Nathan, this changes everything. If Patricia knowingly fined homeowners for something that was not their responsibility, that is fraud. It could even be theft by deception. The HOA needs to report this to the police. Sandra said they were planning to contact the Attorney General. That is good, but they should also file a police report. This is not just a civil matter anymore. You still have Sandra's number. I think I should speak with her directly. I gave Rebecca Sandra's contact information, and the two of them spoke the next day. Rebecca advised the HOA board to immediately contact the Colorado Attorney General's office and the Denver Police Department. She also offered to help contact the 12 affected homeowners and explain the situation to them. The emergency board meeting happened as scheduled. I attended, along with about 30 other curious homeowners. Thomas Carter explained what they had discovered, his voice tight with anger. The room erupted in outrage. Several people shouted questions about how this could have happened and whether anyone else on the board was involved. Thomas assured everyone that he and the other current board members had no knowledge of Patricia's scheme. They had been reviewing all financial records and had found no evidence that any other board member had benefited from the fraudulent fines. However, to be completely transparent, all 4 remaining board members offered to resign and allow new elections. A homeowner named Michael stood up. I was one of the 12 who got fined. I paid $1,500 2 years ago for not salting steps I did not even know I was supposed to maintain. What happens now? Thomas nodded to Sandra, who stood to address the crowd. We will be refunding all fraudulent fines with 5% annual interest. You should receive a check within 2 weeks. We have also filed a complaint with the Colorado Attorney General's office and the Denver Police Department. An investigation is underway. Another homeowner, a woman named Claire, raised her hand. What about the money Patricia spent from the general fund? Are we going to lose our community amenities? No, Thomas said. The HOA has sufficient reserves to cover the refunds. Our annual budget will be tight this year, but we will not need to raise dues or cut services. However, we will be implementing much stricter financial controls and oversight going forward. The meeting lasted 2 hours. Emotions ran high. Several people wanted to know where Patricia was now and whether they could sue her personally. Thomas explained that Patricia had moved out of Evergreen Valley shortly after resigning. Her house was now listed for sale. As for personal lawsuits, that was something each affected homeowner would need to decide for themselves with legal advice. After the meeting, Rebecca pulled me aside. Nathan, I have been doing some research. I think Patricia might have committed similar fraud in her previous neighborhood. She was HOA president at a development in Lakewood before moving here. I am trying to contact their current board to see if they had similar issues. How did you find that out? Public records. HOA board positions are often listed in meeting minutes that are filed with the county. Patricia was president of the Lakewood Meadows HOA from 2019 to 2021. She moved to Evergreen Valley in late 2021 and ran for president here in 2022. That is quite a coincidence. I do not believe in coincidences when it comes to fraud. If she did this before, it shows a pattern. That would be very helpful for the criminal investigation. Over the next few weeks, the investigation progressed. Rebecca managed to contact the Lakewood Meadows HOA and discovered they had experienced similar issues. Patricia had issued numerous fines during her tenure, many of which the current board believed were questionable. However, no one had investigated thoroughly because Patricia had moved away before concerns were raised. The Colorado Attorney General's office took the case seriously. An assistant attorney general named Marcus Winters contacted all 12 affected homeowners from Evergreen Valley and several from Lakewood Meadows. He explained that they were building a case against Patricia for theft by deception and fraud. In May, 3 months after my initial hearing, the Attorney General's office filed formal charges against Patricia Danbury. The charges included 12 counts of theft by deception and 1 count of fraud involving a scheme to defraud homeowners. If convicted on all counts, she could face up to 20 years in prison and substantial fines. The story made the local news. A reporter from Denver's Channel 7 interviewed me and several other affected homeowners. I explained how I had initially just wanted to fight an unfair fine, but ended up uncovering a much larger fraud scheme. The reporter seemed particularly interested in the fact that Patricia had targeted homeowners who opposed her at meetings. So this was revenge. The reporter asked me during the interview, I think it started as revenge against people she did not like, but then she realized she could use these fines to increase the HOA budget and fund her projects. It became about money and power. The interview aired during the evening news, and my phone exploded with messages from neighbors and even people from other developments who had similar stories about HOA abuse. It turned out that Patricia's behavior, while extreme, was not unique. Many homeowners had experienced harassment from power-hungry board members. Rebecca called me after seeing the news story. "Nathan, you are becoming the face of HOA reform in Colorado. How do you feel about that?" "Honestly, I just wanted to not pay an unfair fine. I did not set out to become some kind of activist." "Well, you are one now whether you planned it or not. I have gotten calls from 3 different state legislators who want to discuss HOA reform legislation. They are interested in creating stronger oversight and clearer property owner rights." The preliminary hearing for Patricia's case was scheduled for July. As a victim and key witness, I was required to attend. The courtroom was small but packed with affected homeowners, reporters, and curious onlookers. Patricia sat at the defense table with her attorney, a nervous-looking man in an ill-fitting suit. She looked dramatically different from the confident, smug woman I had faced at the HOA hearing. Now she appeared diminished, frightened. The prosecutor, an assistant attorney general named Sarah Chen, presented the evidence methodically. Property surveys showing easement areas, HOA maintenance contracts proving the association was responsible for those areas, copies of the fines Patricia had issued, financial records showing how the money was used. Patricia's attorney tried to argue that she had made honest mistakes, that she genuinely believed the homeowners were responsible for maintaining those steps. But when Sarah Chen presented evidence of Patricia's background, including the similar issues in Lakewood Meadows, that defense crumbled. This was not an honest mistake. This was a pattern of behavior. The judge, an older woman named Judge Helen Martinez, listened to everything carefully. After both sides had presented their arguments, she made her ruling. "Based on the evidence presented, I find sufficient probable cause to bind this matter over for trial. Miss Danbury, you are charged with 12 counts of theft by deception and 1 count of fraud. Trial is set for October 15th. Bail is set at $50,000. You are ordered to have no contact with any of the victims in this case." Patricia's attorney requested she be released on her own recognizance, arguing that she was not a flight risk. Judge Martinez denied the request, citing Patricia's pattern of fleeing previous neighborhoods when problems arose. Patricia's family had to post bail to get her released. As we left the courthouse, Rebecca turned to me with a satisfied expression. "That went well. The judge clearly thinks the state has a strong case. What happens now?" "Now we wait for trial. Patricia's attorney will probably try to negotiate a plea deal. The state typically offers reduced charges in exchange for a guilty plea and restitution. Patricia will have to decide if she wants to take a deal or risk going to trial." "What do you think she will do?" "Plea deal. The evidence against her is overwhelming. If she goes to trial and loses, she faces maximum sentencing. If she takes a deal, she might only get a few years." Rebecca's prediction proved accurate. In September, Patricia's attorney approached the state with a plea offer. Patricia would plead guilty to 6 counts of theft by deception in exchange for the other charges being dropped. She would also agree to pay full restitution to all victims, including interest, and serve 5 years in state prison with 2 years suspended. The prosecutor contacted all the victims to get our input. Most people, including me, thought the deal was fair. Patricia would be held accountable. We would get our money back, and we could all move on with our lives. A few victims wanted her to face the full charges, but the majority opinion was to accept the plea. The plea hearing was scheduled for October 8th, a week before the trial was supposed to start. Once again, I sat in Judge Martinez's courtroom, watching as Patricia stood before the bench. She looked even worse than she had at the preliminary hearing. Her hair was grayer, her face drawn and tired. Judge Martinez addressed her directly. "Miss Danbury, you are pleading guilty to 6 counts of theft by deception. Do you understand that by entering this plea, you are admitting that you knowingly and intentionally defrauded the homeowners of Evergreen Valley?" Patricia's voice was barely audible. "Yes, Your Honor." "And do you understand that you are waiving your right to a trial and that I will sentence you to prison time?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Why did you do this, Miss Danbury? You had a position of trust in your community. Why did you abuse that trust?" Patricia was silent for a long moment. Her attorney whispered something to her. Finally, she spoke. "I wanted to make the neighborhood better. I wanted people to respect me and see that I was doing important work. The fines gave me the budget to do the things I thought were necessary. I convinced myself it was acceptable because I was using the money for the community. But you were stealing from your neighbors. I know that now. I am sorry." Judge Martinez looked unimpressed. "Miss Danbury, you are sentenced to 5 years in the Colorado Department of Corrections with 2 years suspended. You will also pay full restitution to all victims in the amount of $24,300, plus interest. You have 30 days to report to begin your sentence. Do you have anything else you would like to say?" Patricia looked out at the gallery where I and other victims sat. Her eyes met mine briefly. "I am sorry to all of you. What I did was wrong, and I will have to live with that for the rest of my life." It was not much of an apology, but it was something. Judge Martinez dismissed the hearing, and Patricia was led away by her attorney. Outside the courthouse, several victims gathered to talk. Claire, the woman who had asked about community amenities at the emergency board meeting, approached me. "Nathan, thank you for fighting this. If you had not hired that lawyer and pushed back, none of us would have gotten justice." Others echoed her sentiments. I felt uncomfortable with the praise. I had not done anything heroic. I had just refused to accept an unfair fine. But Michael, the man who had paid $1,500 2 years earlier, disagreed. "You did not have to fight as hard as you did. You could have just let them drop your fine and walked away. Instead, you helped expose Patricia's whole scheme. That took courage." Maybe he was right. Maybe standing up to a bully, even when it would have been easier to just pay the fine and move on, was its own form of courage. The following week, I received a check from the HOA for my original fine amount plus interest. I also received a personal letter from Thomas Carter, who had been re-elected as HOA president in a special election. "Dear Nathan, I wanted to thank you again for your diligence in fighting your unjust fine. Your actions led to a complete overhaul of our HOA's financial and enforcement procedures. We have implemented new policies requiring board approval before any fine over $500 can be issued, mandatory review of property surveys before violations are filed, and quarterly financial audits by an independent accountant. We have also established a homeowner advocate position to help residents navigate HOA rules and dispute any violations they believe are unfair. I hope these changes will prevent anyone from ever abusing their position the way Patricia did. The Evergreen Valley community is better because you chose to stand up for what was right." That letter meant more to me than the money. Knowing that something positive had come from this whole frustrating experience made it worthwhile. Life slowly returned to normal in Evergreen Valley. The new board was transparent and fair. No one received questionable fines. The community began to heal from the division Patricia had created. Thomas even organized a neighborhood barbecue in August to bring everyone together. I attended and had a good time talking with neighbors I had barely known before all this started. Rebecca and I stayed in touch. She told me that my case had indeed led to legislative interest in HOA reform. 2 state representatives were working on a bill that would require HOAs to provide clearer documentation of property owner responsibilities, establish an appeals process for fines, and create penalties for board members who abuse their positions. Your story became the catalyst for real change, Rebecca told me over coffee one afternoon. That does not happen often in property law. I still cannot believe one woman caused so much trouble over some steps. It was never really about the steps, Nathan. It was about power and control. Patricia was someone who felt powerless in her own life, so she seized power wherever she could get it. The HOA presidency gave her that opportunity. Unfortunately for her, she picked the wrong person to target. In November, about 9 months after I first received that certified letter about unsalted steps, Patricia reported to the Colorado Department of Corrections to begin her sentence. I did not attend. I had moved past anger and now just felt a strange sadness for her. She had destroyed her reputation, her freedom, and her future because she could not control her need for power and recognition. The other victims and I received our full restitution payments that same month. Patricia had sold her house and liquidated her retirement accounts to pay what she owed. It was a steep price to pay for her crimes. The following spring, the Colorado legislature passed the Homeowner Bill of Rights, a comprehensive HOA reform law. The bill required clear documentation of property boundaries and maintenance responsibilities, established a state-level appeals board for HOA disputes, mandated regular financial audits, and created criminal penalties for board members who knowingly issued fraudulent fines. Governor James Peterson signed it into law in April. At the signing ceremony, I was invited to attend as a representative of homeowners who had been harmed by HOA abuse. I stood in the state capitol building in Denver, watching as the governor added his signature to the bill that had come about in part because of my experience. A reporter from the Denver Post interviewed me afterward. "Mr. Zimmerman, how does it feel to know your case led to this legislation?" "It feels surreal, honestly. I just wanted to fight an unfair fine. I never imagined it would lead to statewide reform." "What advice would you give to homeowners dealing with similar situations?" I thought about that question carefully. Document everything. Take photos, keep records, save all correspondence. Do not just accept what the HOA tells you if something feels wrong. Ask questions. Hire a lawyer if necessary. And most importantly, do not give up just because fighting seems hard. Sometimes standing up for yourself helps more people than just you. That interview ran on the front page of the Sunday edition, alongside a photo of me standing on my front steps. Not the disputed south side steps in the easement area, but my actual front steps that I had always maintained properly. The irony was not lost on me. Life continued. I refinished my basement. I planted a garden. I adopted a dog from the local shelter, a German Shepherd mix named Max who loved running in the backyard. I went to work every day at my job as a software engineer, lived my quiet life, and generally stayed out of trouble. But I also became more involved in the community. I joined the HOA board as an at-large member, determined to make sure no future president could abuse their position the way Patricia had. I attended city council meetings and spoke up about issues affecting homeowners. I even helped a few neighbors who received questionable violations, pointing them toward resources and explaining their rights. One evening in June, almost a year and a half after this all started, I was sitting on my back deck with Max when my phone rang. It was Rebecca. "Nathan, I have some news. Patricia is being released early on parole. She served 18 months and is getting out for good behavior." I was not sure how to feel about that. Is she coming back to Denver? No. Part of her parole agreement is that she has to leave Colorado. She is moving to Florida to live with her sister. She will be on parole for the rest of her suspended sentence, and she is prohibited from serving on any HOA board for 10 years. I guess that is something. There is more. She wants to meet with you. Her parole officer suggested she make amends with her victims as part of her rehabilitation. You do not have to agree, of course. I told her attorney I would ask you. I sat with that for a moment, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. Did I want to meet with Patricia? What would be the point? But then I thought about the journey I had been on since that first fine. The anger, the frustration, the determination to fight back. The discovery of fraud, the court case, the legislation. All of it had led to positive change. Maybe closure was the final step. Okay, I told Rebecca, I will meet with her. The meeting was arranged for the following week at Rebecca's office, neutral territory. Patricia arrived with her parole officer, a stern-looking woman named Officer Davis. Patricia looked different yet again. Prison had aged her, adding lines around her eyes and mouth. But there was also something softer about her, something more humble. We sat across from each other at Rebecca's conference table. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, Patricia broke the silence. "Thank you for agreeing to see me. I know you did not have to do that. Your parole officer said you wanted to make amends." "Yes. I have spent 18 months thinking about what I did and why I did it. I worked with a therapist in prison who helped me understand my behavior. I had this need to be important, to be respected. The HOA presidency gave me that, but it was not enough. I wanted more recognition, more influence. So I started finding problems that did not exist so I could fix them. The fines gave me more budget, which let me do more projects, which gave me more recognition. It became an addiction. You hurt a lot of people. I know. I stole from people who trusted me to look out for their interests. I abused my position. I targeted you specifically because you voted against my dues increase, which was petty and vindictive. I am ashamed of all of it." I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity. But all I saw was genuine remorse. "What do you want from me, Patricia?" "Nothing. I do not expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did was wrong and I am sorry. You fighting back was the best thing that could have happened. If you had not, I would have kept going, hurting more people. You stopped me." We talked for another 20 minutes. Patricia told me about her time in prison, the therapy sessions, the realization of how much damage she had caused. I told her about the legislation and how her actions had inadvertently led to better protections for homeowners across Colorado. When the meeting ended, Patricia extended her hand. I hesitated, then shook it. "I hope you have a better life in Florida," I told her. "Thank you. And Nathan, for what it is worth, you were a good neighbor. You did not deserve what I put you through." I left Rebecca's office feeling lighter somehow. I had not realized I was carrying residual anger until it was gone. Patricia's apology would not change what happened, but it gave me a sense of conclusion. Summer turned to fall, and fall became winter again. When the first snow came, I watched from my window as the HOA's contracted snow removal service salted all the public access steps in the easement areas throughout Evergreen Valley, including the ones on my property. Everything was as it should be. My story, which had started with a simple dispute over unsalted steps, had evolved into something much larger. It became a story about standing up to injustice, about the importance of questioning authority, and about how one person's determination to fight an unfair fine could lead to systemic change that protected thousands of homeowners. I framed the newspaper article about the Homeowner Bill of Rights signing and hung it in my home office, not out of pride, but as a reminder. A reminder that ordinary people can make a difference when they refuse to accept injustice. A reminder that documentation and evidence are powerful tools. A reminder that hiring the right lawyer at the right time can change everything. And a reminder that sometimes the steps you think are yours to maintain are actually someone else's responsibility. Every time I walk past those steps on the south side of my property now, I think about the journey they started. Steps I had not even known were subject to HOA rules became the catalyst for legislative reform. Sometimes life has a strange sense of irony. Thomas Carter continued as HOA president, doing an excellent job of rebuilding trust in the board. Sandra Phelps became vice president, and together they created a model for how an HOA should operate transparently, fairly, and for the genuine benefit of homeowners rather than the ego of board members. I eventually became something of an informal consultant for homeowners in other developments dealing with HOA disputes. Rebecca would refer people to me, and I would share my experience, explain what worked and what did not, and encourage them to document everything and fight for what was right. One such case involved a woman named Fiona O'Brien who lived in Aurora and was being fined by her HOA for having a garden that supposedly violated community standards. Her HOA president, a woman named Brenda, was insisting Fiona remove all vegetable plants and replace them with decorative flowers. I met with Fiona at a coffee shop and reviewed her case. The HOA rules said nothing about prohibiting vegetable gardens. In fact, they explicitly allowed gardens as long as they were maintained and did not create nuisances. "This is just like my situation," I told her. "Your HOA president is making up rules that do not exist. You need to fight this." I connected Fiona with Rebecca, who took her case. 3 months later, Fiona not only won her dispute, but also uncovered financial irregularities in her HOA's budget. Brenda resigned, and Fiona joined her HOA board to help reform their practices. Stories like Fiona's became common as the new legislation took effect. Homeowners felt empowered to challenge unfair HOA actions, knowing they had legal protections and resources. HOA boards became more careful about issuing fines, knowing they could face penalties for wrongful enforcement. The systemic change that had begun with my refusal to accept an unfair fine about unsalted steps rippled through Colorado's HOA community, creating a culture shift toward accountability and fairness. It was not perfect, problems still arose, but homeowners now had tools to fight back that did not exist before. As I sit here now, 2 years after receiving that initial violation notice, I look at my life and realize how much has changed. I went from being a quiet homeowner who just wanted to be left alone to someone who fought corruption, helped reform legislation, and became an advocate for homeowners' rights. None of it was planned. It all happened because I decided that paying an unfair fine for steps I was not responsible for maintaining was not acceptable. Sometimes standing up for yourself in small matters leads to big changes. Sometimes refusing to be bullied creates opportunities for justice that benefit entire communities. Sometimes the steps you have to climb are harder than they should be, but reaching the top is worth the effort. I learned that documentation is your best defense, that good lawyers are worth their fees, that perseverance pays off, and that one person really can make a difference. I learned that HOAs, when run properly, can be beneficial community organizations. But when run by people seeking power rather than serving homeowners, they can become oppressive and corrupt. Most importantly, I learned that my voice matters. When I called Patricia's office that first time to dispute the fine, she dismissed me and hung up. But I did not give up. I found someone who would listen, I gathered evidence, I made my case, and I won. That victory led to justice for 11 other victims, criminal prosecution of a fraudster, and legislative reform that protected thousands of homeowners. The steps on the south side of my property, those old stone steps in the public access easement, remain there. They get salted every winter by the HOA's snow removal service, just as they always should have been. Children use them as shortcuts on their way to school. Joggers use them as part of their running routes. Dog walkers use them while making their neighborhood rounds. They are just steps, 5 pieces of stacked stone leading up from the sidewalk. But to me, they represent something more. They represent the moment I decided to stop accepting what I was told and started questioning whether it was true. They represent the beginning of a journey I never expected to take. They represent the power of standing up for what is right, even when it would be easier to just pay the fine and move on. Max barks from the yard, wanting to come inside. I get up from my desk and let him in, scratching behind his ears as he wags his tail enthusiastically. Life is good. My house is my own, maintained according to rules that are fair and transparent. My HOA board is honest and accountable. My community is healing and growing stronger. And somewhere in Florida, Patricia Danbury is rebuilding her life, carrying the consequences of her actions but hopefully learning from them. I do not hate her anymore. I actually hope she finds peace and becomes a better person. Her mistakes led to positive change, even though that was never her intention. The story of the unsalted steps is over now, concluded with justice served and systems improved. But the lessons remain, reminding me and everyone who hears this story that ordinary people facing ordinary problems can achieve extraordinary results when they refuse to accept injustice and have the courage to fight back. Those steps will be there long after I have moved away from Evergreen Valley, long after everyone involved in this story has gone. Future residents will use them without knowing the role they played in HOA reform in Colorado. But I will remember. I will always remember the steps that changed everything, the fine that started a movement, and the lawyer who proved that sometimes the property you think is yours actually belongs to someone else, and that truth matters more than power.